Welcome to Wholesale Automatics. My name's David. Today we will be fitting a transmission cooler to the Ford Everest with the 6-speed transmission. Before we get started though, we'll run you through what comes in the kit so you're aware of everything you need. Alright, so when you first open your box, you should get a set of instructions up top, which will actually have a full parts list on the first page so that you can compare and make sure you have everything you need. As we keep going through, you've got your 5 meters length of hose, the wing bracket that will mount to the side of the cooler, the dual cooler bracket itself, your link hose to join the two coolers together, your J-pipe to connect your two coolant lines from the heat exchanger, a couple of bags with your unions and all your clamps and bolts that you should require. And lastly, the P-clamp to mount your J-pipe. Alright, so safety first, need to make sure the engine auto has cooled down, as you wouldn't want to cop any burns from the heat of the fluid. At the very start, we'll have to remove the top grille cover, front grille and bash plates. Then we will remove the horn bracket. These have a little washer on them. Then we'll move on to unbolting the shroud and cut off from the passenger side of the center hole. And we need to drill a new hole for the clip. Just under this side as well. That's better. This is the ambient temperature sensor, which will reattach to the bracket. So this is the piece you have to drill. Once that's done, you can fit the link hose and 5 meter lengths of cooler hose to the coolers and secure with the 4 supplied clamps. Yeah. All right. So that's the link hose between the two installed. Sweet. Fit the top bolt by locating the mounting bracket behind the radiator support panel into the hole, approximately 100mm to the right of the bonnet latch. Sweet. Check that the cooler and bracket have plenty of clearance and that the bracket is sitting straight. So this L bracket that we're going to be fitting sits just over where the horn mounts, and it's to return some of the rigidity back to this shroud after we've removed half of it. Before doing the horn bolt back up, I like to make sure the bracket lines up with the hole up here. These are the two self-tappers that gets applied. If you're lucky, it will line up, one of the bolt holes will line up with the lower shroud mount, which will allow you to actually only have to use one of the self-tappers instead of both. So when undoing these clips, you actually need to use no pressure with the screwdriver, because they are just a plastic thread, and they will, if you press in them, they actually won't come out. So now we'll be routing the cooler lines. You just grab one at a time, just run them around here. Just running it behind the strut mount so that it stays out of the way of any components that it could get pinched between. Cable tie the cooler lines as you work your way to the heat exchanger mounted to the passenger side of the auto, just above the prop shaft. Allow for the engine oil filter to be removed for engine maintenance when you are cable tying the lines. go. Alright, so right now what we're going to do before we clamp the lines is remove the top 2 bolts that mount the heat exchanger. I like to use a locking extension just so you've got a lot less chance of the socket falling off when you try to pull it back out. Use hose clamp pliers to clamp the 2 times black coolant hoses connected to the heat exchanger. So now just up to clamping the 2 coolant lines. There we go. Remove the 4 T40 Torx bolts or 10mm hex head bolts to remove the heat exchanger. Do not discard bolts or bracket. So now we're going to remove the prop shaft. I always mark them as a good reference just so that when you put it back together it's in the same spot. Yeah. It, there's 2 slots you can use lightly with a screwdriver to just pop it out. So we're just going to loosen the lower 2 bolts for the heat exchanger, but not actually remove them at this point. But now we're just undoing or removing the hose clamps on the coolant lines and the heat exchanger. So normally they're both that style of clamp, but this one has been changed for some reason. Sweet. And the back hose you can normally grab and twist to break the seal on it. If you can't twist it to break the seal, one of these hose tools will work. And it's just a matter of getting it between the hose and the metal and working it round, and it will help break the seal of the hose. With that bit done, we'll now undo or remove those 2 bolts we loosened for the heat exchanger. All right. With those bolts removed now, I just use the pliers, basically just pry it off there because there's a couple of O-rings. This is the heat exchanger. Now we've removed it from the car. This is the part we'll replace with our coolers. And these are the top 2 bolts that we removed earlier. What we'll do now is remove these split pins to get this bracket off. So all I'm doing is getting the split pins back to being pretty much equal. Then using the side cutters you can kind of twist while grabbing it, which will pull it out further. And when it's past there you can actually just grab it and pull it out. So these are your 2 unions you'll receive in the kit. The one with a 90° has to be fitted up top to make sure you clear the AC lines underneath the car. If you are struggling to get these in, you can with rubber grease specifically, put a little bit on the O-rings just to help it slide in. All right, So with those two unions up there, you put the bracket back up that we took off the heat exchanger, and using one of the 10mm or T40 Torx bits holding the heat exchanger, we just use them to bolt it back in. So now we'll move on to installing the J-pipe to the two coolant hoses. So this is the J-pipe that's in your kit that we will use to connect the two coolant hoses that went to the heat exchanger back together, along with the two clamps for it. Alright, now that those two are done up, I remove the hose clamps first before we put on the P-clip, because it makes it easier to be able to move it around. Now using the P-clip provided and one of the bolts you removed from your heat exchanger earlier, we will mount the J-pipe to the side of the box. Before I finish tightening the P-clamp, I like to make sure that the clamps aren't touching the other hose up here. Alright, so now that the heat exchanger is removed and we've got a lot more room, it's a lot easier to finish running the cooler lines in now. Now that they're run, just got to cable tie it up to make sure there's room for the oil filter to be removed if the engine's getting serviced. Right, so now that the cool lines have run down here, we'll be hooking these up to the unions we've installed into the side of the transmission. And we'll just have to start by cutting them. Obviously you don't want to cut it too short, so I usually take a rough estimate of what I think I'll need. And it's a matter of routing it. I usually start with the top one first. So there's that top one hooked up, which has a little bit of slack to allow for any movement. Yeah, it's about where you want it. All right, so there's both of them hooked up now. Last thing I like to do is, if needed, cable tie the lines once again, just to try keep it clear of up here so it doesn't rub on that pipe. Alright, so now that the lines are finished hooked up and we've cable tied the last fit out of the way, we can reinstall the front shaft by lining it back up with the mark we had that we made previously. No, that's loose because I'll have to climb up and start it. So when filling them, you want to aim for the top of the B mark. But first, obviously, you have to see how much oil is in there and work out how much you need. This is the fill point and level check spot where there'll be a little dipstick tube in there for you to check the level on. Alright, so it's currently at the start of the A. So what we're going to do, we'll put about half a litre and recheck it. Alright, so now we're basically at the just near the top of B. Probably won't need much at all to top it up, maybe 100 mil. Alright, and there we go. You can see it's just the very top of the B now. Sweet. Alright, so now that that's all done, we're finished underneath. Basically, as bringing the car back down is now when I usually like to cut the cable ties to clean it up and put the guard liners back in. Just one more on this side too. Now with the clips, just putting them back in. Alright. Now that's all done, we just put the grills back in. Alright. Now just put the last bit on.